Welcome to the CEO Bros Podcast, After Hours, with Brian Baldoff, co-founded, grew, and sold VHT Studios. Brad Baldoff, CEO and co-founder of By Your Side Autism Therapy Services. Matt Croak, the consummate entertainer, jack of all trades, and serves as our host.
I found out just a couple days ago that it was National Brothers Day. Actually, you know what's ironic? My brother told me, Brian, you told me a couple days ago, and we didn't do anything about it. So I kind of feel weird about
Kevin,
that.
Mike, sorry about that.
Oh,
I'm not one of your brothers, but I still have brother guilt as I do have brothers.
Let's just blame it on Brett.
What is the traditional celebration of Brothers Day?
Hallmark holiday.
Hallmark.
It's the start of this podcast, and welcome everyone.
All right.
Hey, podcast one.
Welcome to the
Episode one.
very episode.
Cheers.
Welcome to the very first episode of CEO Bros. I am your host, Matthew Croak. We're going to have a deep dive conversation about entrepreneurship, leadership, innovation. I am flanked by two very
Good word.
Thank you. Successful CEOs, also brothers who
Makes
did
me
not
hungry.
celebrate brothers' holiday, whatever that may be.
Like that. He said he heard you say flank and he thought steak.
Flank
That's
steak.
great. Yeah, everybody's hungry when you hear flank. I'm sorry, Matt.
No, so this is going to be stories, lessons about business, but not to get meta. This is the podcast itself is also a business. So I think we start with this very first episode podcast. What are the thoughts going into it? What's the why behind this podcast?
So, I mean, Brad and I have always done this anyway. We've both started businesses. Brad started 6 or 7. I had one major one that started, built, and sold. But every Friday night, you know, it's whether it's on the phone or it's in person, just talking about the business. You know, what the issues have been, bitching about stuff, or celebrating, you know, great moments. And thought it would make a great podcast after, you know, 25, 30 years of stories and experiences to be able to share that with people and you know, capture it on video.
Yeah, it's
Excited
ironic
about
because we talked about in the past, Brian and I would get together and we would talk about just, I got to write a book about that someday. You know, I mean, the funny thing, you know, and you mentioned, Matt, it's all about entrepreneurship, starting a business, exiting a business like Brian did, everything in between, you know, managing employees, scaling a company, worrying about, you know, funding. But it's not just start a business, it's running a business, it's everything in between. And, but we always talked about like, oh, we've got some just incredible stories.
Well, what about, did you bounce ideas off each other? I mean, if we're going, you're running a business, you talk to each other. What about the early days of, is this a business? Like, how did you use each other as a sounding board? Because you've had, not only have you done more than one businesses, I'm sure you have ideas for plenty of other businesses.
Yeah, well, I have to say that I've actually learned a lot from Brian, because when I started my last business, which I'm the current CEO of By Your Side Autism Therapy Services, there was a lot of things along the way where I checked in with Brian and said, "Hey, have you experienced this? Have you ever done that? I mean, this is kind of crazy what I'm going through right now, or hey, this is a situation with a bank, and this type of agreement," and we both would kind of commiserate over different situations along the way. So definitely have turned to Brian at different times, and others as well. But yeah, I mean, so if you're not talking to people along the way, people that can help you, shame on you, because I think that you could shortcut a lot of things and help yourself.
I've got a whole file drawer full of business ideas that I look at every once in a while, tinker with. But, you know, back to your point earlier, you know, now that I'm getting older, a ton of people ask for advice and want to know about this and how'd you do that and how'd you do that. And we talked the other day about paying it forward, because I got a lot of advice coming through. I didn't know what I was doing when I first started the business. And a lot of that advice wasn't tactical advice. It was just, here's what I went through. Here's how I survived this. Here's how I was successful in it. And just knowing that other people had been through it, how they went through it, that those things even happen in other businesses was, you know, the best education I could have gotten, better than any college or books or, instructional videos, things like that. So I'm hoping that's what we can share in this podcast with anybody else who's looking to start a business or grow a business or even exit a business. I think we're going to start these first few episodes with starting a business, but we'll see where it goes from there.
But you have people who say, I'm going to start a business, or I should have started that business, or I had these ideas. You both actually started that business. So what's the psychology between someone who says, I have an idea for a business, and someone who says, I'm going to start this business?
Well, I think it's safe to say we both have our, what you call your idea folder. I think Brian's, I think you mentioned at one time, Brian, your file cabinet.
It's actually a file cabinet of ideas.
File cabinet of ideas, which you don't want to share all those ideas.
I'll bring them to this forum at some point.
I'll do the first
See
movie.
what you guys think.
I'll do the first movie reference. You remember Night Shift with Michael Keaton?
Yeah.
You
You're
put
dating yourself,
put the mayonnaise in the tuna fish, in the fish itself. Okay. First movie reference of the
first of many, right?
And I went Night Shift.
I can't wait to see how much thinner we are in our 100th episode. So we put that out there right now. Anyway,
I mean,
speaking of food,
he talks about a file cabinet. I've got a file folder with a number of ideas that have just not made it to the phase 2, phase 3. But they're great when you first think about them.
Oh yeah, everybody loves a good idea, and
sitting at a bar and you're scribbling something out on a napkin, or you think you got a great idea, and it's kind of funny how they're so exciting in the very beginning, but then they could fizzle out.
How many of you had where the next day when you went to explain it to your wife, it was like, I must have been drunk. This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I mean,
this isn't a business.
Yeah, I mean, because it sounds great when you first think of it. But, the reality is it's just a really cool idea, and that's all it is.
And that's all it ever is.
And you shouldn't be pursuing a business. You shouldn't be investing in it. And so, I mean, that's something that we'll get into in a second. But the reality is that I can think of right now where I've got a file cabinet in a folder with probably 10 ideas in it. And I might pursue a couple of those. But the reality is a lot of them are, if you can't hit the check mark boxes, which I look at, if you can't get through those, then it's just not a business for me. It's just an idea. I don't know about you, Brian. You've got a bunch as well.
I see a lot of that where people either say, I have an idea for a business, and then don't do something with it. Or you tell them about your business, and they go, I had thought of that. I was going to do that.
Right.
And they didn't. And so I think about, like to your point, what's the psychology of what's that trigger point? And I think most people, it's in your head for a while until you get to the point where you're going to share it with somebody. Hey, I got this idea. And then you see how they react. Like I said, maybe I'll bring some of my ideas here and see if you guys laugh or if you guys go,
oh, sure.
Right. But that's the first step, is testing it with somebody. You put it out there in public. And then, like Brett, maybe you start doing a little business plan. You put it on a cocktail napkin. You sketch out a logo or something. And then there's some point where you pull that trigger. I mean, there's a lot of stuff when we'll talk about it that goes into, making that decision and what you do next. But I think part of it's your background. Our father worked in corporate America his entire life.
Yeah.
So I didn't see a startup or a small business until, after I graduated from college and went to a company that was brand new, was franchising, was going to compete with the big guy. And it was super interesting to get that experience. I had never seen it before. There's an energy Brad talks about, like when you start a new business or when
the chi.
The
so
chi.
Good energy. Yeah, you got to have the right energy for that. I think it's the personality, though. You either it's in you or it's not. I don't think you could.
Because you said at some point, that's at some point is a big at some point. You think it's in you.
I think it's in you to become an entrepreneur. Doesn't mean that you're an entrepreneur day one, but I think it's in your blood to want to do it because, I mean, some people like predictability. They get up at a certain time, they start their day at a certain time, they end at a certain time. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way people are wired. Entrepreneurs are wired differently. There's no beginning and there's no end. And there's no the work week consists of this many hours. It's just, you've got to do it and you got to get it done and you are all in. I mean, you either are all in on your idea and you're going after it, or there's probably a good chance it's going to fail. So
that was another reason for doing this podcast is, I always recognized you're the entrepreneur, you're the CEO, you've got all the responsibility on you. There's not a lot of people you can share that experience with or talk with about that other than some of your peers who are also crazy busy and working 24/7. So getting the chance to talk to somebody who's in that same hot seat, that we're running out of cash, I can't find employees, I just had a customer who left, or, whatever those issues are, I think it's helpful. I know there's a lot of...
And do it over cocktails.
And to do it over a cocktail after work is even better.
Yeah. And what was that journey for you? What was your jumping off point? What was, because you had a file full of ideas. So what, you picked one? Like what, the psychology, I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts. We'll get into that later. But what was the mindset of saying, were you working? Or did you have a job at this point? Were you unemployed?
Well, Brian, I really think you have to, I could tell. I mean, Brian's, because he's in a job where he's in an upper management position. He's married. I think you had 2 or 3 kids at this point in time.
2 or 3, yeah.
And he's doing very well. I mean, for any other person out there, they've got a good paying job. He's got a good life. He's got a house. He's doing well. And he decides to just
what
quit.
was I thinking?
What was that? What
was I thinking?
What was he thinking? Yeah. And you left it all behind and you said, I'm going to jump into the deep end of the pool and start your business, which I gave you a lot of credit. I also said, man, that's really bold. But I also had that in my blood too, so I can appreciate it.
Yeah, bold or stupid. I, ever since we started working on this podcast, I've been thinking about, okay, what was that jumping off point? What was that day when I said, I'm going to make the biggest decision of my life and do this? And I don't know if it's because I'm getting old or what, but I don't remember. I mean, it was just like this progression or this, like I said earlier, it started with an idea. I thought about it. I actually...
But Brian, do you think that's because you had enough ducks in a row, though? I mean, were you like, hey, this isn't an idea. It's like I've actually got a number of the things that would be kind of hurdles. I've solved them, and now I can take that step.
I know at the time, I thought I had thought it all through. So you mentioned I was in corporate America. I was actually doing business development and M&A.
And for a while, you're at this company for a while.
Yeah, for a Fortune 50 company, and we're starting new businesses, we're buying companies. So I had an understanding of kind of the mechanics of that stuff. Did not understand the mechanics of running the business itself, all the things that it took. But so I did a business plan on what I thought was a great idea. Videohometours.com. Back in the mid 90s, real estate marketing.
We're gonna have to call
pathetic.
him out, by the way. It's more than this. See,
it's funny how he just kind of blows past it and says, it's a video.
It's a jumping off point.
Videohometours.com
was innovative. I mean, there were no video home tours at the time.
No, I mean, real estate marketing was
drones.
A black and white photo of the front of the house.
Right.
So it was revolutionary. And that's what excited me about it. We were going to do something completely different, something, a leap beyond. Of course, not thinking at the time, sometimes the market's not ready for a revolution. They preferred evolution. And so there was a day, I do remember a day where I woke up and thought, what if we never sell a single service? No one ever orders this. I'm going to feel pretty stupid because I spent all this time on this 100-page business presentation with charts and graphs and forecasts and, our mission statement and things like that. And fortunately, we did get our first sale.
And no background you weren't a videographer.
Oh, yeah, that's the other funny thing.
No real estate background.
Yeah, you weren't a videographer.
Everybody would ask those 2
You didn't
questions.
work in real estate.
Right. Everybody would say, well, so what does Video Home Tours do? And I'd be like, well, we do video tours of homes. That's what we do. I thought it was obvious in the name, but the other one was, so are you an agent? I'm like, no. Are you a videographer? No.
IT?
Right, IT, a little bit, but not really. So what are you doing? And I'm like, yeah. In my case, I was a marketing guy. To me, this was a marketing business. So I didn't even
fill a need.
Right. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I didn't think about, do I have real estate experience? Do I have videographer experience? I figured.
Were you shopping for a home at the time? Like you saw?
I was. Yeah, that was you talk about the impetus for starting the business, because I had this, I wasn't a file cabinet at the time. It was probably a folder full of ideas. But this was one that was percolating. And I think because we had our second or third kid, we moved and we went through the process of looking for homes. And it was horrible. was like, okay, you go to a home on Saturday morning, you walk in the front door, and you're like, oh, this isn't it. Go to another home, kids got to go to the bathroom, it's snowing out, you walk in the second home, it's like, okay, this isn't it. There has to be a better way to do this. And so that's what motivated me or got me excited about it was, boy, I have an idea on how to make this better.
Well,
People are going to love this idea.
So that's kind of interesting because that's one of the check boxes I have in starting a business is there's got to be a want or a need for a product or service. And right there, you kind of ran across it, right? You stumbled across it. You're looking for a home. And you're like, what I really need is a better way of looking at homes, or I wish they had a different way of looking at homes. It hit you. So here now you have this idea that could have been in the file folder that turns into, well, hang on a second. Somebody actually needs this or wants this type of service. I need it. I want it for my home purchase. So, I mean, that would check a box for me to be like, okay, that's something that, okay, is that something that is needed? Absolutely. Now, the question is, can you generate revenue from it? And the funny thing is...
I was just going to say, I'm curious what your other boxes are, because I think that's the only one I checked for myself. Looking back, like, okay, I figured people would want it, but I don't think I did much more at the time. I've learned a lot since then, but...
But, I mean, it's part of it for me is it's the supply and demand, right? So the demand or interest in a product or service, and that is... Okay, so you believe there's a desire, there's a need or a want for that product. And then it becomes, all right, can I actually find those customers? Could you find customers that would want that? And I would think in the real estate market, yeah, there's probably a lot of different realtors, people. I'm sure there's a whole host of people that could benefit from that type of service. So the question for me would be, is there actually, will I know where my customers are coming from? Because I think you and I have talked offline about where... If you can't find your first customer or your customers, where are you going to get your customers from? So, I mean, you got to think.
Yeah, that's got to be an episode for us.
Yeah. It's like, where are the customers coming from? But, is there a want or need? Yes. And do I know where my customers are going to come from? For me, I would think, yeah, it's the real estate world. People are selling and buying homes, and you probably have a whole host of people that can be buying.
Do you think what if you feel people don't realize they need it? Like,
That's a big question.
I don't think people realize that they need video home tour. Like this.
No, I mean, I had lived through, man, I'm really dating myself now, but the introduction to fax machines.
No one else will, so thank you. Easy, that's a layup.
This guy's old.
It's a layup.
I mean, I lived through the introduction of fax machines, and people didn't think they needed fax machines. When you asked them, everybody said, no. But once they came out, they, blew the doors off. But you can have the exact opposite.
For all you kids at home that don't know what fax machines are, it's a machine. It spits out things.
I don't even know how you explain a fax machine to kids.
I said night shift. That's got to be.
He is really dating himself.
We're moving up.
Fax machines are done. Don't worry about it, kids.
But I've seen a lot of more of the opposite, which is, well, of course people need this, and then it just falls flat for whatever reason. Might be timing. Like I think timing was important for us. You
said you also said you were excited by the kind of the future of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
You said something about so demand or interest in the product. You were excited about it. That's another checkbox for me. You can't go into something you don't want to do.
I was.
I mean, you're not selling widgets. You're actually. I kind of in this real estate, and I like the idea of marketing real estate over the internet. So you got kind of a. You kind of got like a passion now or a kind of a zest to do it. And I think that has to be part of it, because if it's not, you could be a couple weeks down the road, a month down the road, and you're like, oh, this is tired. This is boring. I don't know if I want to start a company from this. That excited you. I mean, from what I heard.
It definitely did. And, because there is starting something brand new like I did versus getting into something that already exists, but you're filling a need, whether like this service doesn't exist in this geography or, look at Amazon. It's retail. They were a bookstore, but they did it better. They did it different. It's not new selling books, but it was a new way of doing it. So I think there's a lot of different types of opportunities that people jump into. And it's a big consideration when we talk about starting a business. What are you doing? Are you revolutionizing? Is it an evolution? Is it, capitalizing on a current trend? Like today, everything's AI. Like I would have called my company Video Home Tours AI today.
Yeah. Well, it's like the entertainment industry. I mean, it's movies are, boy meets girl. Yeah, but they do it really well. Have the concept, but do it really well.
You're talking about your Hallmark movies that you?
Yeah, I have a Hallmark idea box of all 30 Hallmark movies. You seem more like a planner. You seem more than comparing you to Brian. The check marks you have. So Brian said he only had one. Can you go through some of your check marks? I mean, I think you're listing them, but let's recap those.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, there has to be a demand. It's a supply and demand question for me.
Number
right?
one.
Yeah, because I think like I'm in buyer side. I run buyer side autism therapy services today, and people thought that I had a family member or it was something personally.
I think everybody always thought that, like, oh, this must be personal.
Right, and it wasn't actually at the beginning. It is, a few months after it became kind of a personal mission for me. But in the very beginning, it was about supply and demand. And I don't ever take an idea and say, okay, we're going to run this into a business unless there's a huge interest or demand in that product or service, right? And I can provide it, and ongoing that someone's going to need that product or service. And so that's the first check mark for me. If you can't answer that, then you probably got a problem, because you're going to have problems with clients. And we've talked about, well, where do you get your clients from then? Because if there's not demand or interest, then you're going to have problems finding your clients. If you have problems finding your clients, you're going to have problems rolling your revenue in, and you got to have revenue coming in to fuel your business. So that's an important checkbox.
What did you see at By Your Side? Where did you see the opportunity?
Well, I mean, autism therapy, autism in general, the diagnoses were on the rise. Back when we started the business, it was 1 in 160 kids were being diagnosed on the spectrum. Today, it's actually 1 in 32. But at that time, 1 in 160, even then, was pretty prevalent. And so what I saw is that there was going to be an ongoing need for this service, and there was very limited supply. There was very limited supply of actual therapists that could provide the service. So when you have a shortage of supply and you have this demand that's increasing over time, it's going to be something that's probably going to be something from a business standpoint that's going to work out. It wound up being a personal mission for me. After the fact, 3-4 months down the road, it became like a passion and a mission for me. And that's why I'm still doing it today. But the key driver to starting the business was a supply and demand issue.
And to be clear, it's a therapy service. It's not a school. It's not a daycare. I'm part of By Your Side. You are running a medical company. So you are trying to find those therapists where there's a shortage to provide those.
Right. It's a therapy practice that provides services to young children on the autism spectrum, and it's in huge demand. Services are needed, and we've been in business for the last 15 years. But that's what drove the whole catalyst to the idea from the start, from the standpoint. First point.
So you guys were laughing that I had no real estate experience and no videographer experience, but prior to you starting By Your Side, you were in the cellular tower business, right? Or were you in the production
wireless?
business?
Yeah, wireless infrastructure. So
it's been in a couple different industries. So curious how you jump from one to another.
Yeah, so it didn't run from it wasn't like I was in wireless infrastructure Monday and then autism therapy Tuesday. The lead up to starting the autism therapy business was probably a good solid 9-10 months of due diligence where I did my homework. I learned about autism. Why isn't autism therapy services more prevalent? Why aren't they being offered in more places? What are the challenges?
Were you looking because you were tired of the wireless business, or because this opportunity presented itself and you were intrigued with it as just another opportunity?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think I was intrigued by. I think it's a good point. I was somewhat tired being in the space that I was in for quite some time, but I was very intrigued by the idea that there could be a business created, and at the time that the business could be created, you're actually helping a group of people that are underserved. So it was almost like, well, this is really cool. I could take a group
it's a good business, and feels good.
Underserved population in high demand for services, and I could create a business model from it while you get the best of both worlds there. And it wound up being that and much more for me.
What was your hesitation as the psychology of it, of going, oh boy, here, because it's a
well, a couple of the other checkmark boxes, which were, one was your startup costs, and a startup cost for a business like that are extremely high. Right. Starting a podcast with a few of us and Amber behind the scenes and getting some equipment and recording.
Is getting more expensive every day. Though.
Yeah, this is
This is our first episode. We're pretty
exactly.
Vodka's top shelf.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going.
Yeah, so I mean, depending on what kind of business you're starting, I mean, that was probably the biggest hesitation, is the amount of money, the startup costs that go into leasing a space and buying all the furniture and buying all the equipment and supplies. I mean, that was a big undertaking, and that was a massive leap of faith. And
we got to talk about that in an episode, the funding and.
That was very scary. That was very scary. And so it all really, it does depend, Matt, on what business you're trying to start, because starting a podcast with minimal startup expense, minimal operating expense, okay, is a lot easier to do than jumping in to the deep end of the pool and starting an autism therapy business, which is very specialized, requires a lot of capital expenditure and operating expenditure to get it going. And so, big difference. I took a big leap of faith back then, and I thought we had something great and we should run with it. That's why I did it. So,
and your identity was already an entrepreneur. So to be fit, you already knew that's what your DNA was. Did that help?
It's in your blood. You
right.
You either know, like, hey,
so that's the psychology of it. Like, is it you have a great idea and you have to do it, or you've already made up your mind? No, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm going to find a great idea and then make that a business.
I did not know if I was an entrepreneur.
You did not,
or not. No,
you didn't.
I'm literally that person who had a good idea, and just fell hook, line, and sinker for it, and learned business later. Because, like I said, I was always on. For the 10 years prior to videohometours.com, which ultimately became VHT Studios, I was in a corporate role.
Yeah.
I didn't have to worry about payroll every 2 weeks. I didn't have to do a lot of hiring and firing and worrying about our leases and our banking and our attorneys and our HR and stuff like that. Was all, I got paid every 2 weeks. I didn't know how that happened. You make the leap into a business, you find out pretty quick, like, oh, I got to pay people.
Yeah. and you got to worry about a whole host of things. Yeah. I mean, it's to the question you asked, Matt, I think it's in your blood, right? I mean, I think you're working at a company and you're working your 8 to 5 or 9 to 6, whatever, and you're doing it every day. And some people are extremely comfortable with doing that and they like the predictability of it. I mean, I can say if you to be an entrepreneur, I mean, you've got to be prepared to be on a completely different schedule. You're working whatever hours it takes, whatever days of the week it takes, and you also have got to be responsible in your mind. You got to be thinking about, like, you're going to be doing things that maybe you weren't think that you'd be doing, but you have to do it because there's nobody else there to do it, and the business requires it. So as long as you're kind of in that mindset and say, yeah, that doesn't scare me, I'm pretty excited to do those things. If you're in that mindset, then you've got the beginning of being an entrepreneur. And I think I've got that. I think my brother's got that. So
both families, both kids, and they both talked about, I don't know if this is going to work. What we haven't talked about that. What were they saying? What were your parents saying?
So it's funny because
you're saying you're running ideas by what's going on back there.
Yeah, Brad earlier, what he said about my situation is exactly what my mother said. You've got a great job. You're making great money. You just bought 100%. A house. You got a mortgage. You got kids.
Does not want to see their child struggle.
What the hell are you thinking? And I apparently didn't hear that until later. And I was like, yeah, what the hell was I thinking? I was like, literally, I look back now and go, boy, that was a huge decision I made. I'm sure I talked to my wife about it. I didn't just
I'm sure you did. Let's go ahead and live and say you talked to your wife about it.
I'll have to check with her. But
let's go ahead and say
what I mean is I don't remember that big sit down, come to Jesus conversation at the kitchen table of, honey, I'm gonna give it all up to try this.
That's so interesting because you're saying you weren't like, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to find it. Right. You said this is an idea I want to pursue, and yet you can't. Yeah.
I don't know if I felt like maybe there was always a way back. Like, well, if this doesn't work in 3 months, I'll just find some other job.
But Brad, were you doing? Did you start VHT Studios could you do it concurrently while you were doing another job?
I did cheat a little bit, yeah.
Okay.
So
because that helps if you could do it a little bit. I mean, we didn't really talk about that, whether or not you could be doing something and can you work on your business idea at night, on the weekends, outside your work, because it is difficult to do two things at the same time without technically moonlighting. But the reality is it a business that you can get started while doing something else? I was fortunate enough that I was able to do that. And that makes a big difference versus somebody that's starting up with nothing and their entire livelihood depends on it.
So I had two huge factors in being able to do this. One was the timing of the market. Like digital video cameras came out the year we started this business. Like it couldn't have been done prior to that. Digital video editing, digital video cameras. So the cost came way down. The efficiency came way down. And it was the beginning of the internet. Like this was an internet business, videohometours.com. Couldn't have done it without that.
And I think I cut you off. Go back. It was like Yellow Pages, you said. Literally.
Oh, real estate marketing?
Yeah, go back.
You would go to a realtor's office and they would show you this big book and say, here's all the homes that are for sale. And there'd be a page. 80% of it would just be text. And there'd be a black and white photo of the front. And you'd pick out the 10 that you'd want to go see. And on Saturday morning, you would drive around to those 10 homes. You walk through the front door and your wife
A lot of wasted time.
Walk in and go,
huge waste of time. Huge waste of time. So there was this timing of, there was a convergence of things that were happening that enabled a new business to happen. So that got me excited. Like, oh, I'm at the leading edge of this because no one else has had digital cameras. No one else has had the internet. We're going to go with it. And you know, not to shift gears too much, I think we're at a precipice right now, or a convergence right now with AI. I think there's going to be thousands of small new businesses pop up. People have brilliant ideas on how to apply AI to existing processes that are inefficient or slow or not economical. And I'm excited for that. And I'd love to be able to chronicle some of that in this podcast, have some of those people on and share their experiences, get involved. The second huge bit of timing I had is what Brad said. The company I was working at got acquired, and the acquiring company told our group, no more acquisitions, no more new businesses, put it on hold for a while. So, my team, we were going to Arlington Racetrack, we're going to Cubs games, we're playing golf, like still getting paid. After,
What? Just kidding. Did you wait a minute? Let's stop right here. I think there's a lot of
that was a little bit
potential viewers that want to learn more about
some
that.
good fortune. I eventually tired out, and I don't want to say I'm tired out of that, but it gave me the opportunity to really work through the business plan for VHT Studios and get it started.
But you knew that was going to. Bottom line, you knew that was going to come to an end, though. And that
I wasn't going to lose my job.
You weren't starting a new company though because that was ending. You were going to start this company.
Yeah, I wanted to start it anyway, and this gave me the opportunity.
Although he doesn't know that about himself, isn't that funny? Like it was going to happen, and you still are not really sure that jumping up.
No, but now that I think about it,
which proves a point of it's in you. I mean, I'm not. Yeah.
I think it's the idea, the passion, and then the timing was the last piece. Because I had the idea, I had the passion. It took these two, circumstances for me to go, well, if I'm ever going to do this, like this is the time to do it. The timing's got to be right. I've seen so many businesses fail because they were too early, too late. I mean, if we had started
timing for you or the product? Because I say this both. I say this both because it was
that combination.
It was both for me too. And now that I'm thinking about it, that's something that is pretty similar, Brian. Is that the timing was right for me, kind of like on the tail end of my career on the wireless infrastructure side, a little bit seen that, done that, getting a little bit tired of this. So wanted to change, and at the same time, you've got this high, the diagnoses on the rise, supply and demand, issues within the autism therapy world. It's like the two converge at the same time. So I think that's a really good point, is the timing both for yourself and for the product or service that you're wanting to create the company around has got to match up. And I think I think that happened for both of us.
So do you remember the moment that you started by your side? What was the first okay, this is day one. Like today we're doing day one of this podcast, even though we've been working on this for a little while now. But what was day one of By Your Side?
Well, no, I think it was just the development of the idea itself. Like the idea, like, okay, we have interest, we have demand. Okay, we know what service we're going to offer. I'm excited about it because it's kind of up and coming, and this is needed, and there's a shortage of supply, so we think we can go down there. We have a good idea of what our startup costs are going to be. We have a good idea what our operational.
So you were already working with other people?
No, I think I was just laying this out on paper with my co-founders and partners, and we were laying it out, and it was kind of coming together like a jigsaw puzzle. It was all coming together as far as, okay, we have these 5 things now in line, and I think that's the original point about this idea versus business was all these kind of check marks were hitting in line, and we said, okay, well, this is something we've got to get going, and then the moment where you realize, like, okay, I'm signing a lease to do this business, and this is getting really serious because the lease is 7 years long.
Yeah, that's serious.
And we're going to incur some costs. Obviously, I haven't talked about getting the investors together and all that, but the reality is that was a time when it hit me, when I actually signed the lease and said, okay, your name's on the dotted line. You're doing this business for the next 7 years at that facility. That hit home. I was like, wow, this is pretty serious.
But I'll ask you the same question. Wife, kids go prior to By Your Side. What was that conversation when you would have been continue to be very successful at what you did in the corporate world, right? So now Brian's already an entrepreneur. So do your parents go, they're more understanding, but what about your family? Like what were those conversations? Or did everyone go, no, that's your personality. We get it.
Yeah, so I had a little bit more of I had an advantage I don't think Brian had, which was that I could operate in my current capacity. I was overseeing a business and starting a business at the same time. And that was extremely challenging because I didn't want to compromise what I was doing for the main company, my 9-to-5 job. And so a lot of the stuff I was doing in prep and startup was falling on my partners and my co-founders. And the work I was working weeknights and weekends. So I was literally working 7 days a week. I was working crazy hours.
That's that all in. You're talking
all
about
in mentality. It's like, we're going to make this work. So, obviously I had to rely on a co-founder and partner to help me do it so that I could, if I didn't have a partner or a co-founder to do the business with, I would have probably had to quit my primary job sooner because I wouldn't have been able to do both. But I was fortunate enough to be able to get the business, the whole process set up and running while I was doing something else. And that helps. I mean, because there's people out there that don't have that luxury where they just got to jump in and it's like, God, I hope the hell this works,
Right.
And
we got to turn the page on Matt and say, why haven't you started a business, Matt? You've entertained all over the world. You've been with different organizations. You've had to have seen ideas or come up with ideas.
I love working with new businesses. New Shakespeare Company was new. By Your Side was new. I like the
Playground.
I like the energy of working with a team. I think better than being out in front right now.
That startup energy of
because
and the high wire.
I even love comedy teams, right? The Three Stooges. I mean, I've always been a team guy. Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy, Monty Python. Yeah, actually, well, not too far.
Well, here we are.
So I've been fortunate to be in many startup businesses, and I just like the energy and being a part of that new business and watch it grow. So I've always been excited about learning and seeing it instead of starting one in itself. And I've written a book, so I have done personal projects.
So that's
that is my what I want to do, the way I want to do it, the way I want it to look. So I have had that experience, which has been rewarding. But I like the process of being with the team.
I think entrepreneurship too is like Brian and I both have business development backgrounds, and without this being misunderstood, starting a business is like landing a big deal. It's the thrill, the kill.
Yeah. There's a thrill. There's definitely
I'm really excited by the unknown and what can happen in the unknown. So you're starting a business and you just wonder about what can this develop into. And it's unknown. The path ahead is unknown. It could be monstrous big. It could be a long road. It could be fun. It could be a roller coaster. But it's the thrill of the kill. And when and not kill literally, the thrill of the excitement of tackling the unknown. And you have that in a business development background, the thrill of landing a big sale. Entrepreneurship is the same way. It's the thrill of pursuing something that's unknown and trying to get after it and seize it. And I think that's in our blood. And that's what means the most for me in pursuing it.
Do you tell someone on the fence, well, if you don't know, don't do it? Or do you tell someone on the fence, no, do it? Where do you land on that? If you don't know, don't do it? Or you're like, no, go for it. Someone's right on the fence. What advice you have for them?
I'd say don't do it. I think if you're on the fence, like you either know it in your heart or you don't, and you just need that push, whether it's something happens in the market, like I said, it's that timing thing of, okay, it's now or never. I'm doing this or I'm not.
Because I agree with Brian. I think that if you have got in your mind, be like, I'm all in on this. I'm going after it. I'm chasing it. I'm not gonna look back. You can't look back. And the other thing is, if you're out there and you're looking to start a business, look, man, you got to be all in, and you got to be thinking, I'm not going to do this for a couple of days, a few weeks, a few months. You've got to be prepared to take on your lumps along the way. And if you're like, I'm not sure if this is going to work and I don't know where this is going to go, I mean, you're already casting doubts, and those doubts are going to turn into bigger and worse problems for you. So you got to get yourself over the hurdle to say, I'm going to do this. I'm all in to do it, and I'm going to jump in the deep end of the pool. I'm not going to just, tip my toe in the water. You got to go after it.
That's a big part of the psychology, as I see with entrepreneurs, is that's all they see is the positives. They don't think about the risks. They don't think about the negatives. I know I didn't, because once I ran into investors, who that's all they ask.
That's all they ask.
What are the risks? What are the downsides? What are the negatives? I'm like, what are you kidding? There are none. This is just, we're going, baby. That's what I see in a lot of entrepreneurs, is that spirit of, I used to call it Captain Kirk. I can't fail. I will figure out a way to get through anything. I don't know what's going to come my way, but I'm confident enough that I can figure out a way through it. And God, we got some stories we'll share where coming through it was like at 11:59 and 42 seconds. Something happens and boom, you've made it through and you're on to the next challenge or next adventure. That's the thrill of, it's like other people would hear that and get nauseous and go, I could never do that.
You're on the fence. No, because either
Yeah, you either got to, get the thrill from that, or it's going to crush you.
We said a couple times, 6 months, know that you said a few times, even podcasts and starting this one. It's so interesting. With so many podcasts, there's not enough content because everyone starts one. Nobody keeps doing episodes. They do it for like a month and go, they're not thinking, well, do I want to do this for 6 months? Do I want to do? So that seems to be an important.
Look, we already got cocktail glasses for.
We already got cocktail. Right. We don't need.
We're pretty confident.
We can't quit now.
We only do this only episode.
Amber, you want to quit now?
Amber quit her high-paying job to work for us.
We can't. All in. She's got a cup. We have these cups and everything. What the hell? Why would we do that?
I want to touch on something quickly because it's interesting dialogue. Where does the role of asking other people? Because if you say you have to know you're in and you're going to do it, but yet you both said, well, you start feeling it out. Is there a danger of entrepreneurs asking too many people and people go, yeah, you shouldn't do that. That's a bad idea. And then they don't act on it? Or is it the same theory of the fence and say, if you're asking and they're saying no and you don't do it, then you shouldn't have been doing it to begin with?
I think it's the type of business you're starting, right? I mean,
that makes a big difference in everything, the type of business.
But do you ask people then? Do you ask advice? What's the point of asking people if it's a good idea?
So, I mean, there's presenting your idea and seeing how people react, and then there's asking for advice.
Just to catch a reaction.
Like, does this make sense? Do you see this? I mean, I remember a story where I was enamored with RFID tags. And I was trying to explain to my wife that, one big application is they put these in cows and cattle and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, what a great business, because you can track them as they're being put on trains and getting off of trains. And she's like, so you can point a thing and it says it's a cow? And I'm like, yeah, maybe this isn't really a business. Like, it's just that injection of reality. Like,
it's a short story or a poem at best.
Right? Yeah, this is not a novel.
So funny.
That was always a great litmus test when I'm super excited about something, and then you tell somebody and they go,
Or that's already out. Like,
right? Yeah, or they already have it.
No, it doesn't mean that you can't do with that product or service someone else got there, because obviously there's multiple burger joints, there's multiple, taco places, there's multiple, golf club manufacturers. So you can make things that are already out there, but the question is, are you going to be able to delineate yourself with your product, and you're going to get your share of clients that come in and are going to, are going to go after your product differently than all the others that are out there. And I think that's something that we'll probably
we'll definitely do.
So let's summarize. That's a great point.
So
what you do different than your markers. Give us some of your markers again. No, find your customers. I heard a couple times.
Find your customers is gonna be big.
You got to find your customer. Yeah. You got to have a product or a service that's either in demand, either wanted or needed. Most importantly, if it's needed, you're in really good shape. But if it's wanted or needed, you have a product or service. That's a good start. Secondly, you better be really passionate about what you're doing. Brian mentioned, like, hey, that was exciting him, the unknown of technology merging with real estate. For me, it was, hey, I could see we have a problem in the autism therapy space, and there is a shortage of supply. That was exciting for me. So you got to be passionate about the topic or the idea of what's coming from it, and then I look at it from like a startup and operating expense. Is it something that you can raise the money to do, and you'll be able to persevere and manage that business while you're trying to bring that revenue in? Can you raise the funds? Will you be able to operate? And if you can, then I think you start check marking the boxes and you say, okay, this is something that we have a good chance of being successful at.
And I'll say it 3 times because I like things in threes. If you can see yourself doing it in 6 months, a year, that should be a consideration.
Yeah, a lot of times people come up with this flash bang idea, and then it's literally you talk to them a week or two later,
and it's like
gone.
Right?
Yeah, that was cool, but I'm not. It's like, well, okay, well, you were talking about being a company.
You asked me to invest money.
Yeah, and now you're not even talking. You've moved on to another idea. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's got to be something that you are going to be talking weeks, months, years down the road, and if you're not, it's like one of those things where it's just probably a good idea.
So forget that when people are asking you to invest, and then when they tell you their business idea, you say, well, have you ever thought of this? And it's something like almost completely different. And they go, we could do that. It's like, okay, well, you're not really committed to the first idea then, are you?
Right. Yeah, you've got to be, you got to have strong convictions to whatever, that idea turned business plan. You got to have strong convictions, because if you're flip-flopping, to Brian's point, if you're like, oh, we can pivot, not do that, we'll do this. It's like, well, you didn't really have strong convictions in the first place. And I think that's important, is that that idea, which has now become a business plan, has got to be better battle tested, in the sense that you've checked all the boxes, you've thought through all the things that could go wrong, and you've still come out on the other side and said, it's still a business idea. I still want to run.
Still believe in this,
and the best you
even
can.
More so.
Timing of personal and if you can match those two together, the best you can. Maybe hard to judge that timing, but
yeah, because I've seen people, personally, it's a good time for them to do it, but they don't think about the market as much. It's like, okay, this could be the greatest idea ever, but this year it's not going to work, or in this location, or for whatever reason. And they don't have the patience because, well, I'm in between jobs, so I want to do this now. That kills more businesses than anything, is just not accepting the fact that this is not the right time for this business. For whatever reason, it all depends on what business you're getting into. I think today is actually the best time in my entire life to start a new business. It's easier than ever. All the tools are there. Everything is online. Everything is a subscription. You could start a business tomorrow, but you still got to have something that people want.
Wait, do you think it's easier to start a business today?
I do.
Really?
I agree with Brian on that. I think today it's easier to start a business than it was years ago, only because you've got social media, you've got exposure to people that if you want to sell product or service to people, it's easier to get that to the reach of those people. You've got more access to things online of what you need to do, from legally incorporated and searching up banking partnerships and funds and grants that are open to you and looking for different investor partners and things like that. I just think it's easier now. It doesn't mean that you have, you still have to come up with a good idea.
Well, yeah,
Right. It doesn't mean it's easier to succeed.
Right.
Easier to
It's more-
succeed. It's easier to start,
Right.
but
Yeah.
not maybe. That's a good point.
Great
Easier
point.
to start, but not necessarily easier to succeed. But yeah, I would agree with Brian on
Because
that.
there's more competition for that business.
Oh yeah, the easier it is to start, the more
Right.
people are going to be
Right.
doing it, and
Yeah.
you really have to, like I say, have a competitive advantage. I'm looking forward to talking on that one.
Well, and this podcast is a good idea, and we'll go more into
Yes,
the
it
deep.
is.
Yeah, it is. So we'll go more of those conversations about what are next steps, what are stories of buyer side opening, going 10 days without billing anything because you're trying to figure it out. I remember those days, right? So until next time, please join us. Hit the subscribe button, leave comments, send us emails. We'd love to answer any questions. We'll have guests.
And this is podcast one.
This is podcast one.
We finally got through one podcast.
I thought we were going to have snacks too. Are we going to have
That's
those?
We have
podcast. Whoa,
snacks.
whoa, whoa! Podcast
Can't
two.
do everything
Second
We'll have
one.
snacks.
This is very
We'll
high
have snacks
confidence.
and
So
podcast.
happy brother sibling day. We'll get through that
thank you.
awkwardness
We're going to
there.
celebrate that
Celebrate
next year.
that.
so.
Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time.
Cheers.
I think that the Bears not having an offensive coordinator is criminal.